Okay. Now that we're like thinking about the cold open, I think it's not such a cold open anymore.
Well, it's not so cold, but we're not coming in with like a hot topic either. I thought you said you were going to do the cold open and at least push something to.
I can't do the cold open by myself.
Well, I thought you had something to push a snowball down so we could snowball on it.
Did you pick a snowball because it was cold?
No.
What does snowball mean?
I don't know, Adi. What does snowball
Adi
mean?
is from Indonesia.
No, I just think that's.
He's never seen snow. No, snowball is in like a topic that grows. Like someone says something and then you can make it grow. It's like pushing a snowball down a hill and it accumulates snow as it rolls.
I see. I thought it was a sexual thing.
Oh.
I definitely thought Adi thought it was a sexual thing.
Adi is gay?
Wow.
No.
We really are past DEI.
I'm so excited that the Three Brown Guys podcast has not been canceled by Doge quite yet.
Yeah. We next week will be Three White Guys. We'll open with polka.
Oh my god.
Our bosses at the CIA will be so upset if we stop this podcast, guys.
What would actually Three White Guys podcast look like? Would we talk about the same things, just more boringly?
I think there'd be a lot more sports.
Specific sports, I think.
I mean, are they three white guys interested in the same thing we are?
How was that polo match, guys?
Polo, actually, very fun story, is a Indian sport.
No one cares.
Wow.
Wait, are you sure it was Indian?
That's a great way to start.
I was going to say, we started with poop on one of them, and now we're starting with snowballs on this one. But actually, it ties in very well to language use. When one person says snowball in some dialects.
This is the Three Brown Guys podcast. I'm Sharia. So a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in this episode. Talk about language, dialect, linguistic variance, whatever you want to call it. And I grew up speaking Telugu. My family also speaks a bit of Hindi at home. And then later on in life, I learned other languages. And of course, to you now, I'm speaking English.
I'm Pablo. Yeah, I grew up speaking English and Spanish. One of my parents is Guatemalan. My other is plain white American, and grew up speaking both languages.
Hi, my name is Adi, and I am Indonesian Chinese. So, like, I grew up speaking Indonesian, Mandarin, Taiwanese or Hokkien, English, and I also speak French, German, and Spanish.
I'm learning Japanese. So I'm getting a third one to catch up to you two.
I once got a certificate in Russian language because I read a Chekhov short story all the way to the end and passed a comprehension test. But please do not speak to me in Russian.
I didn't know you had that credential.
Oh, yeah.
I knew you were super into Russian, but I didn't know that.
I feel like we're just bragging at this point.
Because you started it. You totally started it, dude. Like, I feel the need to be like, well, look, okay, all right, I just three languages, and one of which I'm not very comfortable in unless we're in a taxi cab, in which case my Hindi gets exponentially better. But yeah, like I don't, I feel like we were all in a pissing contest. Adi, you came in here, you pissed on all of us.
You started it.
How? I was just, this was okay. This is the Three Brown Guys podcast. Do you mean I started the podcast? In which case, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, we did prepare this time a little bit more.
We had some guiding questions.
Well, okay, maybe I should start by saying that I disagreed, or I found today's theme, or the way it was phrased, a little problematic. Mm-hmm. I find that, like, kind of like the labeling between like language and dialect a little arbitrary, and I think that, like, it is very much it's not just a linguistic terminology that we are using, but also like something that is like political. I think I gave an example that technically American English is a dialect of English, but it's not common that like someone would still refer to it as a dialect. And also dialect carries with it a certain connotation of like something being regional or provincial and or less prestigious than a standard language. And so I think that, like, kind of like when we use the term dialect, sometimes I will find myself of either avoiding it or being intentional or insulting when I use that word.
Like when somebody says something stupid, you're like, oh man, you're speaking dialect right now. Number one, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, right? It's like there's a prestige angle to it. Is there a language in which you don't speak the prestige version of that language?
Yeah. Well, I don't really speak it that well, but at home, we speak some Hokkien, which is like the variant of like Chinese, like found in Fujian province and Taiwan, and it is not mutually intelligible with Mandarin. And I think throughout of its history, it was deemed to be not only less prestigious, but also like suppressed. Like, the Kuomintang in Taiwan basically used to like beat kids in school who would speak like Taiwanese, like because like it was deemed to be like, less polished, less educated. And also like it contradict their claim of like representing, being the legitimate government for the entire China. And even like, in other places, like I think that it is not, it's found, I think there is more colloquial aspect of it. Like, in fact, like there is till today, like, kind of like a lot of like Chinese dialects is not something that is written, and nor is it like standardized. So it is actually, in some ways, very much, it only exists in a spoken form.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And
I'm with you on the observation that when people say dialect, they tend to mean something lesser. I don't know why in my head I have this trope of like the king's court and then people from the various regions of the king's provinces, and then no one says the king is speaking a dialect, but then when the representatives from the various regions come up, they're all speaking a little different and a little funny, and that's kind of what I think associates in people's mind with dialect. Is that like power centers will mean default for some reason.
Yep.
Like that's why newscasters speak in the Washington D.C. accent as much as we have it. You don't hear newscasters speak in a Boston accent or a New York accent. You know, there's a
I mean, just the idea of that is kind of funny to me, right?
There's one.
Sorry, to your point, actually, like Australia used to import Brits to like be their anchormen and anchorwomen.
Really?
Because like Australian accent was deemed to be so shameful. Like, I mean, it was an embarrassing thing. Like, they would not let Australian accent be in the media, like, until like the 70s. It was a huge moment when like Australian accent broke into the screen.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, they're like you can even sound like yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that, there was I think Zoe Saldana was cast in a Nia Simone biopic, which they never filmed because there was so much outrage. Because Nia Simone is very, like, she is a dark black woman, and they cast a light-skinned black woman to play her, and they're like, you can't even be allowed to represent yourself. And it's just funny that the news media did that out of this kind of cultural prejudice.
Yeah.
And, like, on the point of the news, a Boston accent, like, there was a great reporter who posted an outtake on her Twitter. It says, whenever the Boston comes out, and she says, we're here in front of the Senate, we're the senator from New Hampshire. Excuse me.
It's like a burp, and she's just like, "Excuse me,
Yeah.
must be something I ate."
Yeah.
From New Hampshire.
Hampshire, exactly.
Parts of this bill are similar to the executive orders that have already been put in place in New Hampshire. New Hampshire.
But it just came out the way she grew up speaking it. And so I get with you, like the power dynamics around calling something a dialect does have that kind of minimization effect. So yeah, I don't know. When we were passing around the prompt questions, for one, I would say that I fully agree with the correctness of that analysis, because maybe I don't think enough about geopolitics or to like take these actions super serious, like as mindfully all the time. I don't always apply them, but I absolutely agree with that. And when I had to try and define myself what makes something a dialect versus a different accent, my kind of litmus test that I came up with was a very feelings-based one, which was if two people recognize each other as speaking the same language, then it's a dialect and not another language.
Yeah.
Because like a Dominican can speak to a Venezuelan, and they will sound very different, but they will both say we're speaking Spanish. And so in my head, that's when you would call those dialects, right? An American person can speak to a British person, and they will both say I'm speaking English. But like a Catalan and a Castellano speaker are not going to say that we're speaking the same language. And so I will let them have that. And it's kind of this kind of, that's the best definition I can have, which has probably got like a whole bunch of holes. But if they both agree we're speaking the same language, then I would say that's when I would call them both dialects.
Something to add to that was that, like, I think it's just like in a relationship, sometimes it's not mutual, like where one party would consider the other language to be a dialect and the other one,
Well, then you spitefully no longer apply the grace. You say, like, fine, you're right. You're not a dialect.
But then sometimes it's advantageous to be like, Yeah.
Yeah, I gave an example of like, kind of like the 30 Years War was pivotal because the Dutch, in the peace treaty, the Dutch language was then accepted as its own language instead of like a Germanic dialect.
Oh.
Because like, that's part of the things of having, winning wars. You get to dictate like whether you're part of someone's language or your own.
Well, I mean, that's why I asked you guys as Asia experts compared to me, because you're both from Asia. But I was like, is Lao so different from Khmer, or so different from Thai? It just seems weird that each of these languages is like corresponds exactly with one country. And you guys said, well, it seems to be a nationalization project where they're actually growing more distinct from each other now that they are like calling themselves, as you said, like the Dutch branching off into its own.
One of the things is that like, in history, it's like, you learn that like a language is, I mean, it's an evolving process, right? Like I think language is a living thing, but I think modern language is like is an essential part of the nation building process. And one of the tools is that like, I think in history, like we learn that like, kind of like nation building process always goes through like certain steps. When the language is like has its own fairy tales, like the Grimm brothers, like, kind of like when it has its own dictionary and when it has its own like literature. And please.
They're watching me react. I also want to make sure he's being very kind and letting us take the space. We're talking about a lot of stuff, but I do have a game that we can play I want to hear what he has to say about what we've been saying now.
I mean, I feel like both of you are hitting a lot of the nails on the head. I just want to add one thing to the hitting part. The thing you mentioned, Adi, about the Kuomintang kind of like smacking kids that they spoke Taiwanese in the classroom. If the nation building project is like a list of tasks to get done, it's like you got to have a flag and a beer and a national language. One of the subtasks of the national language part is apparently you got to beat kids who don't speak the language. Because like in French, there's this term, or not in French actually, in Occitan, there's this term called the vergogne. Vergogne means shame, and it's basically like there used to be a shit ton of speakers of a language called Occitan, which was somewhere between French and like Genoese. Or like modern French and Genoese, and they used to speak that in the south of France until like the early 1900s, where everybody got sent into a public school system, and then if you spoke Occitan instead of like the Parisian central approved direct dialect of French, linguistic variation of French, then you got smacked, and then you were shamed for expressing yourself in that language, until eventually all these regions went from speaking like 90% Occitan to speaking like 0, right?
I agree with that part. Like, I think there is like a level of like coercion and the sticks, if you will. But I think there is also the other side, the carrots, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think an example is that in Ireland, Irish language has a special place in the constitution and in the society. So if you speak Irish, you get special benefits, special scholarships, and like. But I mean, how many Irish people actually do speak Irish? And it's like. There is the next part to that, right? Like, after like the dictionary, the books, the literature, there's also like, the movie industry, the media that is needed for you to support this language and make it like cool and make it like, and I think this is the part that oftentimes like when a language doesn't occupy that central place in the country or like, AKA able to get like government subsidies or like have its own like Hollywood whatever movie.
There was a Hollywood Esperanto movie.
What?
Yes, there was one like major motion picture that was filmed in Esperanto, and it had a famous actor in it too. I can Bing it if you give me a second. But like,
Pablo works at Microsoft.
I do not.
He does not.
/OpenAI.
We're just name dropping places. I will never work.
You heard it here, folks. Pablo will never work.
There are 4 feature films known and shot in Esperanto. Oh, and no, and the one I'm thinking of has William Shatner in it.
He seems like the type who would speak Esperanto.
Yes, William Shatner was in a movie where he and everyone else in it are speaking Esperanto. So you're right that you need the supporting industry, but it cannot be 1 or 2 movies.
Well, I mean, when a language receives government subsidies, it sometimes feels like it's like kind of on life support.
Yes.
Okay, maybe it's not like government subsidies. I think an example that I see Cantonese like film industry is now eclipsed by like Mandarin film industry, and I think that kind of like coincides with the decline of like Cantonese like in terms of like speakers versus like kind of Mandarin, and I do see that like as well like kind of like I know India right has a very robust like and diverse film industries, but some are doing better than others.
Absolutely.
And especially like in the modern era, like a language, being able to speak that language, even if you're able to speak Occitan, like can you really use that language to learn something, like to go to school? Can you,
like manufacturing,
it's
for
not
example.
an academic language. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like there's some level of, can this language give me access to a modern lifestyle?
Yes.
Right, and sometimes it's like no, it's like sometimes an indication that you speak that way. That's that's a flag that you do not have access to the modern lifestyle, however that's defined.
Well, I mean, that's also very true in Guatemala. We have about 22 indigenous languages and Castellano.
Yeah.
And everybody who wants to live modern has to speak Castellano. And speaking one of the indigenous languages means that you will never escape that lifestyle if you want to.
Yeah,
It's a big one of the bases of a lot of the racism down there.
And it's really funny that like when you told me about this topic, I thought about you and Dora, like and
Dora is
Soria's wife.
She's from Singapore.
And she's Chinese and she's a Mandarin and English speakers. What would your kid like speak, or what will you teach your kid?
Spanish.
Ándale.
No, I mean, like, it's even funnier, right? Because like Dora's family, one side speaks Hokkien and the other side speaks Teochew.
But she doesn't.
Please
she
teach them Urdu.
Teach them Urdu, yeah.
But she no longer speaks either of those.
Yeah, she does not speak either of those, and like I don't think she's super confident in her Mandarin either. And English is like the language that we have in common, that we speak it together. But we definitely also have, I don't know. There's some funny terms like tongs, right? Dora always calls it a kiap, which is apparently like a pan-Chinese word for tongs. When I feel like the word tong is already a Chinese enough word. Why can't you? Right? But this is me. What do I know? Again, I don't speak Chinese. Like this is, but
What's
you know,
the word for flower?
do you want to know the words for flower bridge in Cantonese?
Sure.
Fuck you.
Adi, what are you sitting on in Vietnamese? You're sitting on a chair, which is gay.
So I don't know. I think that like when we think about the kids and what they're gonna speak, I think like it's sort of a meme to be like, oh, you should put them in Mandarin immersion school. You know, it's like,
Or-
especially in the Bay Area, there's a lot of like,
and then like kind of like, what are they gonna read? Like I think that's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I mean like I can't imagine like the kids being able to like read both like Mandarin and Telugu and Hindi. Like
I mean, my brother's kids. My brother is married to a Japanese woman.
Yeah.
He has the same background as me, though, and they're trying to teach the kids some understanding of English, Spanish, and Japanese. And certainly, the kids are having a lot easier time with Spanish than the Japanese at this point. But especially on the reading, for I don't want to say obvious reasons, but if you're immersed here, like, and one parent's speaking Japanese, so I think that's a valid question. I mean, when we ended the last podcast, we said, what do we want to talk about? I want to talk about language as a function of identity, which is actually what this discussion is kind of default, like moving into,
Yeah.
as opposed to the more dialecty things, because I have a lot of feelings about this. But do you guys, we can stay here, or do you want to hear my game?
I do want to hear your game
Okay,
idea.
here's the game. Hearing Adi talk about like nation building project is about like multiple steps, including the language thing. Suppose the U.S. does not have free elections, or we become civil servants for the next 30 years, and we're on the committee, and our job is we have 30 years to do this, and we can use government resources. Our job is to make sure people call U.S. English American, and call it something distinct than English in the rest of the world. Like, we have to pull, I think you were saying Serbian and Croatian, call themselves different things, and we have to somehow apply the tools of geopolitics so that 30 years from now, people just say, oh, I speak American. And we can speak to people who speak English, but it's different. Like, what changes do we have to do to the language itself, and what tools do we have to use this if we could, like, turn the knobs?
It's really funny, and I think it goes back to like the thing is that like how language is it's a living thing, right? Like, and the thing is that especially U.S. being such a hegemon or like having this hegemonic stature, like U.S. itself has already transformed the English language.
But we have.
So-
So we still call it English.
No, but my
I want to
point.
call in honor of calling it Gulf of America. I
Yeah.
want it to call us America.
No, but my point is that like for you to be like distinct from everyone else, then like I don't know if you can stop, say for example, like Canadians or like Brits from like being able to understand certain like Americanism because of.
I don't want them to not understand necessarily. I just want there to be a defensible case that it's different because, like, we were talking about how Hindi and Urdu are very similar. Their writing is a bit different. Talking about how, yeah, when I talk to Norwegians and Swedes, they say we can understand each other. Like, what changes would we have to make so that I'm not saying that the Canadians and British couldn't understand us, but they would not want to be called American speakers, and we would not want to be called English speakers.
Well, I mean, even if we don't want to be called that, but like if they're like, for example, like evolving in the same direction, that like
Okay,
that
so we have
is-
to make tools to hold them back. Again, we have all the tools available to us, right? We can make our own fairy tales. We can change Hollywood. We can, I don't know.
So I think some of what's happening is that American is sort of the mitochondria of English. Like, you know
It's
what I
the
mean?
powerhouse
It's
of
the
the cell.
powerhouse of the cell. It's like
Yeah,
the powerhouse of the English language. Where like, I think when many people around the world now speak this like sort of globalized English, they're using American turns of phrase.
Yeah.
They'll reference like American football things without really knowing the rules of American football.
And I think about like kind of like orthography, like the spelling of like some how American spelling has dominated, like especially in the age of like Microsoft Office, like kind of word processing softwares. Like I realized that like when I was a kid, we learned British English. For example, like connection used to be spelled with an X.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
And I would find that really cringe now. I think that would just
Yeah.
be like,
Yeah, and that's kind of like and it's accepted now in the UK. Like they will start writing it like spelling it the American way, and I think this is like kind of like a phenomenon where it's the same way. I think like in Portuguese, like because like Brazilian Portuguese dominates like the Lusophone world. That like Portuguese in Portugal actually had like a spelling reform to be more in line with like Brazilian like orthography, and so in some ways I feel like America is already doing that, and so
we just need to have a branding exercise.
yeah.
So even within America, though, we do, again, like we mentioned earlier, kind of converge on this northeastern accent. I think of Vietnam, for example, right, where Vietnamese, North and South, are more different than I started studying some Vietnamese earlier last year, and I was like, oh, does it really matter which one I pick? And then now that I've done a bit more research, I was like, oh, these are pretty different. And a big point of contention after the war in the 70s was after the North won, the North was kind of like, okay, this is official Vietnamese. They speak a dialect in the South, to your point about power. And the South does not accept this narrative about it. I just wonder if we wanted to go hyper-American, and again, to distinguish ourselves, we're going to call it American, not English. If we would pick Texas, or we would pick Boston, or we would pick New York, or pick LA Surfer Dude, if we would pick one and say, okay, this is going to be the official American accent now, and something to really distinguish us from even the existing global hegemonic flat English that has taken over.
I wonder if, okay, I have one mechanism, which is you have to translate the Bible into that accent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
like, to go back to the Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian example, those are, linguists would consider them, like, pretty similar languages to each other, like, if not the same language, right? But Serbian is written in Cyrillic script because Serbians are historically Orthodox. Croatians are, meanwhile, much closer to the Italian
Catholics.
world, so they're Catholic, so they write in Latin script. And Bosnians were closer to are historically Muslims, and therefore would write it in Arabic script.
Can we do, just like Mandarin did the simplified characters, could we do simplified spellings? Take the connection with an X and it's just like, take the I out of friend, for example.
I think like you can do that, but I think like the thing is that especially I don't know. I think the trend is one of convergence because like when we're talking about like Vietnam and these other countries, like these are like with social media and with labor mobility and like people move from one place to another for education and like integrated network. I feel that it's really hard to develop something in silo for like a certain segment of population.
I agree. what if you tried to anyway? Like, countries try and do this all the time, right? Like,
Because like I feel
like
the trend.
during the Cold War, they had to keep rock and roll in Hollywood out of the Soviet Union because it was just too fucking cool. It made capitalism look too cool. So they had to go against a very natural force.
But that was before TikTok.
Yeah,
Or
okay.
before like smartphones, you know, kind of
Yeah.
like, and I wonder like if that's still even possible. Like I think like for example, like when I see China, like, you know, kind of like these obliteration of like, you know, regional dialects or linguistic variations, a lot of it has to do with TV and like having access to TV or like, you know, TikTok or Douyin or these tools. We talk about like, you know, how in France, you know, there was an element of shame to like, you know, shame people from like not speaking like regional dialects. In other parts, like, you know, kind of like in Germany, where dialects is like encouraged, like, you know, regional identity is encouraged in Germany, people stop speaking dialects because like you don't really want to exclude people or
So
like
even the encouragement isn't enough.
yeah, like I mean, like
I guess
you're gonna have like
one out of you're fired from the committee. Like if so, like by this I mean if I was trying to go to NASA, like all right, we gotta get to the moon by 1969. Someone goes like, do you know how hard that is? I just don't know if we can.
Don't
So,
you know about this thing called gravity?
Gravity
Like,
is
it's really hard to fight.
It's
wow, the committee isn't even established and you're already launching a coup.
But look, the committee is barely incipient, and you're like already
clear,
being like,
you're
this committee
absol-
shouldn't exist.
you're
You're trying to
absolutely right.
doge us right now.
Yeah. You were absolutely correct that all these forces you're talking about, the trends, everything you're saying is true, but I don't want it for the game of the exercise. It brings up a good question, which is, if you love pluralism, as I do, and I do love pluralism, I want everyone to mix, how do you do that without flattening culture and converging? Like, how can I exist, Mr. U.S. Guatemalan, and not lose some of both? You know, like if we all mixed enough, we become just a paste where we all converge. But I want us to keep mixing because it's cool as hell. So I mean, that's the question I'm hearing from what you're saying, which is you're right. I actually think this is an impossible task if we tried because everyone's kind of converging. But
I don't know, like I think that like I know when I see examples from like, you know, truly quote unquote like multilingual societies, like, you know, in Indonesia, for example, like, you know, most people speak Indonesian and some other secondary or tertiary language, but like there are only like 95% of the people are only literate in Indonesian. They might speak Javanese, they might speak Balinese, they can't read it. You know, and it's just like, I don't know, you know, and like, and I see like, you know, I have a good friend who's like from Luxembourg, and I think it is a truly multilingual society. It's like, you know, they went through they got educated in French, German, English, and Luxembourgish, but like ultimately they only pick one. Once you go to like, you know, for your tertiary education, like, you know, it's, I don't know if maybe our brain is not big enough to like, you know.
It's possible. Or maybe like they just have a sorting hat they haven't told anybody else about. Like you put it on and it's like everyone's like, it's gonna be German, it's gonna be German. and then the hat just yells out Luxembourgish. Everyone loses it because that never gets picked.
yeah,
You know?
that scene where it's like, please don't let it be Luxembourg. And then the hat's like, why not? Who's Luxembourg Dumbledore? I don't know.
Probably like I can't even name a famous Luxembourgian, like some Luxembourger.
Luxembourgish. No, Luxembourger. Yeah,
Luxembourger. Yeah, I can't even name one famous Luxembourger.
I can't either.
Right up there with the famous Andorran or Maltese.
Jean-Claude Juncker.
Sure, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
He was the president of the European Commission.
Oh yeah.
Okay, get mad at me about that. Like that's gonna help.
You know, I mean, like, just because you're ignorant doesn't mean that like, you can, like,
You just said any syllables that sounded vaguely French. I'd be like, yeah, man, totally. Jean-Paul Jouclair? Those are French syllables, dude. I hear you.
That's not even what I heard. I said I heard Jean-Paul Juncker, and I was like, I don't know who that is. And then now that you clarified that it was Jean-Paul Jouclair.
Jean-Claude.
Oh, Jean-Claude.
Okay.
It was actually Francois.
Oh, Jean-Claude. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Sorry. No. Please get mad at me about it.
Yeah, name famous Telugu, okay?
Me? P.V. Narasimha Rao. You know, he was the Prime Minister of India.
Yeah, for like 5 seconds. And it was accidental.
Was he the Pupienus of India's leadership?
No, he was.
Pupienus was a Greek Roman emperor who ruled for like 90 days. and his name is Poopy Anus.
Pablo has a great video to share with everybody after this.
But I didn't know about the Telugu president who was PM for 5 minutes.
He was PM during like India's foreign exchange crisis. So there was like he instituted basically some of the biggest economic reforms India has had in its history, and it was due to the fall of the Soviet Union. Basically,
And like, wasn't he like an interim prime minister?
was he an interim prime minister? I don't think so.
Are you calling him a dialect prime minister? Is that what you're saying? You're just
hell,
kinda
dude?
he's not a language, he's a dialect.
You're telling me that interim prime ministers can't do everything that a prime minister can do? That's a little
No,
unfair.
wasn't he like after Rajiv?
No, he wasn't. No, Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated in 1984, I think. So I thought PV Narasimha Rao was in the early 90s. So he was. I don't think he was an interim prime minister. I think he was a legit guy.
Should
who
we
was around for a
bing
while.
this? Because otherwise people will leave this podcast and have like just no real conclusive. You
No,
can
look,
bing this
we're-
yourselves.
We're just ignoramuses who don't know what Jean Paul is. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
So I feel like we should keep it that way.
Yeah. Let's keep the spirit of our conversations alive, where we all live with 90% correctness.
Misleading.
But no, if I was forced to name a famous Telugu person, it would unfortunately have to be Satya Nadella. Right? It would be the CEO of Microsoft, the company Pablo doesn't work at.
Yeah, I don't work at Microsoft.
That's what I just said. So yeah, now I feel defensive. Who are some other famous Telugu people?
It's okay. You can be the first famous Telugu.
I mean, Satya's pretty famous.
I think he's pretty famous
That's a
within
pretty
tech
good-
circles.
Yeah.
True.
We have Oscar Isaac in Guatemala.
Actually, J.D.
But
Vance's wife is Telugu American.
That's true.
That
Yeah.
is
Ushi.
true.
Usha Vance.
Usha. Whoops, got it wrong.
Yeah. What did you say?
I said Ushi. I thought it was
Ushi.
Ushi.
Yeah,
It
no,
was
Usha. Yeah, Usha Vance.
I stand corrected. Apparently, he was in office for 4 years.
Whoa! Now who's the Jean Paul Leclerc?
Yeah, now who's a dialect prime minister?
Okay, I think we've lost the plot.
We've lost the plot.
We were
Yeah.
originally trying to get America its own identity.
To call it American.
To call it American. So look, I love a good quixotic task.
Yeah, so we can move on from this. We had
No. One last thing on this one. Okay,
Alright.
I think the translating the Bible is a big portion of it. The newscasters, they got to be speaking whatever
Yeah.
American accent we pick.
You know, if the Australian project was any indication, I think that doesn't really work.
What do you mean it doesn't work? Now we all recognize Australian as an accent.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, like, you know, they were like importing like British, like, you know, anchormen and
Oh,
like,
to
you
like
know,
to overwrite what was naturally occurring.
yes,
Yeah.
Oh, it was naturally happening, and they were like ashamed of it. And they were
Yes.
like,
Yeah. Well, so
oh.
they're like, we got to stem the tide of this Australian identity and go back to our old British shit because this is disgusting to have this on our airwaves. So they were importing. This is what Adi's telling us, importing
Yeah.
British people, but that wasn't enough. And then they shone through.
Okay, wait, but no, doesn't that
this-
support me and my idea that like because maybe that's the difference. I do think there's a natural American accent, an American way of speaking and expressing oneself that is already distinctive enough from the British method of speaking that it could like all it needs is a little bit of push and a little bit of a label and people will be like, oh, that's American, because people already do that, right? When people watch, when Indians come over fresh from India to the US, many of them already speak a pretty good American accent because of American media.
They watch a lot of Friends or something, and
Exactly.
so they do their best
And
Friends.
it is
impression.
almost always Friends.
It always Friends.
yeah, but see, this kind of like speaks to my second point. If let's say other people like are able to imitate this quote unquote, like then it's no longer
Well, I think it's like spirit of the thing versus letter of the thing, because I think you're right that the spirit of the thing is like America's already an American English that's hegemonic and taken over the world. But I think what Charlie is saying is that if we just insist on people calling it American and tweak 2 or 3 variables, then we get to have some defensible claim that it's something else. I think you do need to change the writing. I think you do need to change the writing harder. I think we had simplified. Like, if we really did it, because Mandarin did a simplified thing, which pisses me off because I'm learning now the non-simplified characters for Japanese, and I just wish I could get 2 in 1 here. But they did something like this. They're like, we're a different thing. We're doing simplified. If we
Japanese is already simplified.
But if we spelled Wednesday correctly and not that Wednesday shit, if we took the I out of friend, which is my favorite example, if we said comfortable, not comfortable, like if we simplified English and called it American and then just enforced that in schools and beat kids, we learned that you got to beat kids.
I think you got to beat the kids.
You got to beat the kids, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But if you did this kind of thing and called it American, but didn't change the speaking much, then we could eventually. And the Canadians wouldn't be willing to beat their kids. The British are not going to change their spelling. They would.
How do you know that? They've already changed connection.
They changed connection, but not color. They didn't change color. They still call it rubbish. They don't call it trash.
Yeah.
Right?
They never they don't have garbage trucks. They have rubbish lorries.
Rubbish lorries, right? Oh, hey, a British kid comes to a school. Like, I knew a British kid who came to school in 3rd grade, and then he was like, excuse me, do you have a rubber? Right? To, like, his classmate. Lol. They're not going to change enough, and we can change more, and we can change, again, keep the speech, but then change the writing, and then...
It's good that they practice safe sex so early, though.
I mean, like, another way would be, like, to tank America's economy.
Well, yeah.
At that point, then no one will want to learn American English.
No, I don't mind.
I don't mind the cloud that it does.
I don't mind if people want to keep learning it. To your point, the hegemonic is already there. It's just that they start recognizing it as something else. And
I think you could even tell somebody, why don't you speak more American?
Yeah.
You know? Like that. I think that's already a thing.
We do
It's just that's usually done as like a, we are the default and you need to like just get to the default. Meanwhile, if we make this other category that is like, okay, there's like American standard, but then there's like American received pronunciation, which I think is essentially what I'm trying to suggest we invent.
I also kind of like the idea of us doing a contract. An American company does a contract with a Canadian company, and then their lawyers look at it and go like, I can't read this. This is American. Because they use all the other spellings, right? And they have to run it through a translator so they can get their old Canadian English with all the bad spellings. I'm not saying bad spellings.
I mean, there are people at the border of the Netherlands and Germany whose job is like there are like offices that are technically split half in the Netherlands, half in Germany, and like there are people even who have 2 phones on their desk. If they pick up the phone on the right, they speak in Dutch. They pick up the phone on the left, they speak in German. So yeah, funny things like that happen a lot, and I think like I love this idea. It's very. Look, I'm not saying this is somehow in your blood because that would be racist, but it is a little bit like, why isn't there a Temple of Athena in the middle of Guatemala City?
Yeah. There is a Temple of Athena in the middle of Guatemala City showing off his knowledge.
And I think one thing I would say is like, it reminds me of I don't know if I would call it an experiment, but like say like the Quebecois path. Like, Montreal was like, the economic capital of Canada. And I think that like we could agitate, and I think it's one of those things that like, if you can have your identity, you can have your distinct language or something, but then like, I think it comes that you have to sacrifice something else. Like,
I think it's almost... We've waited in a few spicy topics where maybe say something problematic. It's my turn. Well, no, not really. But like one of the theories of bling, and again, this is just to reveal that no one here is black or an American black person. Bling. The idea that you wear a necklace that is just studded with everything, and you spend all this money is like to almost show off that I have so much money to spend. I spent it on something that I'm just going to share that I spent the money, right? I think maybe there's like a cultural bling element to keeping your language and keeping it distinct. Like being able to say, like, our country or our culture is so rich that we are going off the beaten path, and no one can force us off of it. Does that make sense?
It's a white elephant. It's just like this really expensive thing you can do that's like kind of hard to maintain, but also at the same time.
But it was like you were saying that Catalonia has most of the economic power of Spain. And that's why they are able, again, that's why they're in part not having to normalize and speak Castellano. Or Montreal used to be the economic capital of Quebec.
But like,
and so maybe part of the way they're able to assert their powers is say, like, you cannot force us to speak your language.
But each time they do that, they flex their muscles, and each time they kind of like assert this kind of like, certain aspects of their identity. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong, and I'm just saying that like it has a very deleterious economic impact. Like, kind of like Catalonia, like a lot of companies are moving out of Barcelona, like because of like the secessionist movement. And again,
but that's the bling element. It's deleterious to spend $25,000 on a necklace.
You can sell the necklace afterwards.
Well,
but
maybe.
I don't know.
What I mean to say, like, a lot of ostentatious displays of wealth to show that you are wealthy do hurt your bank account. Like it's not an investment.
Yeah.
And so
it's-
that's kind of what I'm trying to. Maybe this line is too tenuous, but like I'm not trying to say it's a good idea or a bad idea, and I don't think it's against what you're saying. But I'm
Yeah.
saying that for a lot of people, it's worth the trade-off and almost a flex of its own.
Okay, it reminds me of the Taliban, which like I feel like comes up a lot. And like I'm not like okay. The reason it does is that the Taliban are not actually. I'm pronouncing it the very American way.
terrorists.
That's not for me to decide. That's for our CIA handlers to decide who the terrorists are. The Taliban are not actually philosophically Saudi in origin. They're actually philosophically Indian in origin. They are descended from a school of thought called Devbandism, which is from the north of India. And it was actually originally an anti-colonial movement that was basically like, if you make your culture impenetrable to the global culture, then you will be safe because your resources will never be like they'll never want to invade because it's just so expensive to
And
try to like,
impenetrable.
yeah. You, like,
Interesting. It's like a cultural, very thick defense.
yeah, and I think like maybe that's what like maybe that's why America hasn't gone out of its way to be like, no, this is American, because for the past 70 years we haven't wanted to lift up the, what is that thing called? The thing that goes over the moat?
Drawbridge.
Raise the drawbridge. Yeah,
Yeah.
we haven't wanted to raise the drawbridge.
That's interesting. It's like, well, like any empire, we get a lot of strength from plurality and being able to, like, for example, Ellis Island, harvest the best, these immigrants for the longest time. We haven't wanted to be impenetrable to the world.
Correct.
And it's more of a reactionary thing happening now, but
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I think it's also speaks to like maybe like the power dynamic of the empire. It's I think like I find like the subject of like decolonization and especially like the Commonwealth a very interesting one, because like it used to be that like the British empires claims everything and everyone, and you still see like vestiges of that today. Like it used to be that like anyone who was like a member of the Commonwealth could just move to the UK and like be British, and they can still so for example, like today, like if you're a member of the Commonwealth, you can still technically stand in British election. Like, and
Wait, do you think we could get that back if Canada becomes the 51st state of the United States? Like, do you think that the way that merger would work is that we would have to take on the Commonwealth identity of Canada? You know how like when Kirby absorbs something?
I have no idea who Kirby is.
Okay.
But
he was the prime minister of Luxembourg.
Honestly,
Adi.
ignorant of you. Adi, I'm sorry.
but I am just saying that like I think a lot of these
The
laws
Nintendo character is a metaphor for capitalism.
they're meant like kind of like when something is like open, like it's because like I think the assumption is that like the influence or the exploitation goes in one direction, and then like, and I think when as the power dynamic shifts, then like kind of it sometimes goes in the other direction, and that's when you have to start like putting all these like rules to basically like stop people from like moving from the Commonwealth to the British Empire and like having all of these things, because
To the core of the empire.
yes, exactly.
Like you could no longer. Oh, interesting.
Because like the flow of movement and capital used to be from the center to the rest of the empire, and then now as the empire is shrinking, it goes in the other direction.
So it's actually so as the empire is shrinking, it's advantageous to keep the drawbridge down so that more people can come in, and like you kind of serve as like the center of refuge as the empire is collapsing.
No. You want to stop that from happening.
You want to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, so it's a healthy sign if
You keep things open.
you keep things open. And then, okay, so this is just like, I didn't want to get into current events because it feels like we're going current events, right? Like, I don't know.
We can go there. At some point, you said one of the notes is you want us to take things personal, and so we can do that at some point too.
I do take everything personal.
So current events though.
Okay, I mean, like, I think there might be more appetite for your American language project than ever before.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
It sounds like you were actually very much with the times.
No. That's why I joked. Imagine there's a fascist takeover and we just have control for 30 years. Because someone might be sitting in those seats doing exactly that. But yeah.
Okay, I do want to take this personal though. I think there's a reason why the three of us use certain words, sound a certain way, use probably even certain diction, and I think it's because we all went to the same university, which is why we're called the Three Brown Guys. And to me, that's when I most became aware of prestige language, because before that, I was a kid who had arrived to America and was just assimilating my like Indian English and slowly changing that Indian English into American English, until eventually I got to college and realized I spoke kind of ghetto New Jersey English.
I'll
Right?
also note something I think is really interesting about your case for the viewers at home. Shari has a sister who's 6 years older than he is, and when they arrive, she still speaks with a light Indian accent, and
Yeah.
he does not.
Yeah.
I think there's something interesting about language development that's been studied. I do not know the exact details, but there's like a sweet spot that if you hit it, it's like the bad spot, the awkward spot. But if you're above it, you keep the parent accent, and if you are below it in age, which Shari was, you adopt the like new country's accent.
Yeah, it's called the age of plasticity, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really interesting that you're like, I was trying to turn my Indian English and assimilate it, and it ended up being ghetto New Jersey, but it actually like completed the transformation to a degree your sisters did not.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway.
And we have some friends who like came to America even later, and they sound pretty American now. Like we have one friend who's from South Africa who came when he was 18, and then for the first year of my friendship with him, I didn't understand a goddamn thing he said. I'll be honest. I just liked that he smiled
Was
and was
this
a nice
Elon?
guy. How dare you? How dare you?
Giving us emeralds. I like that he smiled a lot and gave us emeralds, but I couldn't understand a word he said.
For me, like, university was where I first realized that, like, prestige language was a thing, because I encountered really fancy people. And, like, you know, there were, I guess, fancy-ish people back in New Jersey as well. But it felt like I became aware of the fact that within English, within American English, I think Adi's dying over here. We're going to get to that in a second. But we're just like within English, within American English, there was clearly something that was like a prestige accent. That's how Ivy League kids sound.
And this was his hillbilly elegy.
Oh my God.
Bloomfield, New Jersey.
I just saw the word sopressata and I lost my shit.
Oh my God! If you marry the right person, you could become a Telugu vice president through a hillbilly elegy type
No, an
vehicle.
interim prime minister.
Interim prime minister. Fuck off. I'll never be Jean-Paul Leclerc.
Did you say Jean Paul? Because I think that was the mistake I made. It was Jean Claude, right?
I definitely also got the last name wrong. I said Leclerc. His name isn't Leclerc, right?
Yeah, Juncker.
It sounds very similar to me.
It's Charles de Gaulle. Or
I'm
something.
pretty sure Juncker is just a dialect form of Leclerc.
No, but so yeah, you then you did multiple phases of assimilation. It sounds like first you took it to your Newfield, New Jersey,
Yeah.
and then you got to Brown. You're like, oh, I got more assimilations to do.
Yeah,
I got to
yeah,
sound kind
exactly.
of like these fancy people.
Exactly.
I mean, so I grew up in Washington D.C. and I grew up listening to NPR in the car. My parents just like played it on our long car commute, and so from a very early age, I had this notion of prestigious thing. That's why I picked newscasters as my example. And then in high school, I studied acting, and acting taught me to be very careful about my diction, about my projection, and optimizing my voice.
Is that why you sound like that?
This is why I always sound like that. Yeah,
Wow.
Shari has been making fun of my voice lovingly since we were in college, but it is why I sound the way I do, is that I spend a lot of time being very mindful of it. So I also had a similar, I think, kind of thing about it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it assimilation. Obviously, I grew up in this country, but I will validate and echo your ideas of like, yeah, understanding that there's a prestigious English and shaping myself to be more of it.
Yeah. Like there's a ladder and you're like climbing it.
Yeah. Though for me, the multilingualism thing, to talk about it, is something I like to say, and it's been very nifty, and people like go, ooh, when I say it, is to point out that I've never been monolingual. And I think it's very interesting when that happens. There's an old dinosaur comic on the internet where the comic artist is talking about the linguistic capability of babies. And they say, like, babies have to invent the concept of language and then learn one without a language to think in. Like, it is this long process that every baby does. You did this, I did this. And it's kind of insane to think that they can do that. But for people who grew up bilingual, it's like you invent the concept of language already as something of which there are multiple, and then you assign them multiple from the very beginning. It's never just been apple, it's been apple and manzana. And I think that shaped a lot of how I can generalize most concepts in my life. I think being bilingual. So that's kind of my connection to bilingualism and to bring my story into it.
I think it's really interesting about like the example with like apples and manzana, and I feel like for me, I speak like different languages, but I feel like each language occupies a special domain that like rarely overlaps. Like talk about my emotion in a certain way, I cook with certain, in a different language, and I kind of like I philosophize in a different language, and I think that I don't know.
What would be the biggest miss? Like, which was the worst one to cook with? If I got you a cookbook in this language, you would like open it and feel pain.
Well, no, it's not that. I just think that, for example, like, I always give this example, like when I cook, like, most of my cookbooks are in French, like, because like I think the French has a richer, more extensive vocabulary when it comes to like cooking, more precise. And whereas I have like some old German cookbooks that is like barely like, a recipe is barely like a paragraph long. And like, you just have to like
draw the rest of the owl.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, what am I supposed to do with this? And it's like, you didn't tell me to like preheat the oven or like, kind of like, and it's just like not very intuitive. And like, and I think that each language has its own niche, and I don't know whether it's how like I acquire or when I acquired those languages, or maybe like each language serves a certain purpose or like vehicle. Like, I think an example of like Indonesian is not a language that is meant to be a high language, if you will. Like, kind of like it's meant to be like a vehicle for national unity. So it takes like the lowest common denominator of like.
Oh my God! Did they do the American project? Do you think they did like?
Come up with an Indonesian for the whole country.
So you're telling me,
but kind of it's like
the half Balinese first president of Indonesia was like, we need an Indonesian.
Yeah, like I mean, like it's meant to be like it's meant to be like grammatically simpler than like the other languages.
So my simplification project is part of the ingredient list.
Yeah, like kind of like an example of like why Persian is a language, or like Farsi is survive all these empires, is because like it is like one of the most efficient tools or vehicle for these empires. Yeah, so I think that certain languages like definitely lend themselves to the empire project, or like so I do think that like different languages have different
like they have built up
strength.
Yeah, and like they have a built up set of tools for what you want. So it's like arguably the first empire ever on Earth was a Persian one, if I'm not wrong.
Somewhere in the Middle East.
Like,
I don't know.
The guy's name was
was
like
it Babylonian? No?
Maybe Babylonian. Okay. Maybe the first idea of a world-spanning empire. You know what? I'm not going to cite my sources on that one. the point I'm trying to make.
The Bible.
Suppose that what I just said was true. Then wouldn't it be really interesting? Wouldn't that be fucking wild? No, I think what I'm trying to say is that like, God, what's a good example of this? In English. Oh, actually, this is the Boomhauer example.
Oh, right. You got to work us in.
Right. So, like in American English in particular, there's a certain way we perceive a Southern accent, and like there's like all sorts of virtues and vices associated with a Southern accent that are not necessarily fair, because the South is full of people who are of all different stripes. But like we. What? My hillbilly place. But basically, I think like if you want to translate an American show, and Pablo, you love the story about King of the Hill.
Yeah, so in King of the Hill takes place in Texas, and there are these 4 Texas guys who are always smoking cigarettes and drinking beers and just hanging out, and they're often just taking a sip of beer, going yep. But when they talk, one of the characters, Boomhauer, speaks incredibly Texan, stereotypically Texan, and I can't really. I'll try to do an impression, but it's kind of like, yeah, man, so I was walking around, the gas price over control, man. You know, when you stop your
Bobby,
truck,
I
and
told
you
you,
just pick up the
don't
truck
take for me, man. It don't
look
life
at the
too
tab,
short,
man, just
man. You
you
don't
can't afford
want
that
no
gas.
grudge, man. I thought, man, you gonna let little bygones be bygones, man.
And he talks a bit like that, and kind of my dad would literally watch the show with us and not understand what he said.
Yeah.
I could understand it, but my dad is like, I have no idea what he said.
Yeah.
But so when they localized this, because in the 90s, localization was more than subtitling, they would actually hire people to dub over it, and then they'd air it across. When they aired the French version of King of the Hill, Boomhauer was speaking Quebecois. Everyone else was speaking French, and Boomhauer's Quebecois. And so I thought that was a brilliant and creative way to cast that.
Yeah.
But to Charlie's point,
Yeah, I think even in, if I'm not wrong, in France, a lot of comedians are Quebecois because just showing up with that accent just kind of primes people for comedy. From what I hear,
it's an audio clown makeup.
yeah, which is that's so sad now.
I mean, that's what it sounds like you're describing.
But I think that is in some ways like some languages have a structure in them that is a sort of mirror of what the society is structured like. So it's like, we've got these people. Imagine you land in like a new country and you're like, okay, so do you have that one region of your country where like everybody sounds a little funny and they all kind of fuck their cousins? Now, you know what I'm saying? And like, I think you could honestly go to a lot of different countries and they would be like, oh yeah, we've got those guys, but they're in the Northwest, and then you'd be like, Northwest, that's not where you keep them. No, those are the guys that are supposed to be down south. It's like, oh, the South. No, those guys, you do not want to mess with those guys. They have guns. They're going to use it on you. They live up in these scary mountains. They're probably serial killers. Like, oh no, for us, that's like, I don't know, the northern tip of Idaho or like Montana or something. That's not where you keep those guys. So I think that like even if the regional map doesn't fully map, like America has certain regional stereotypes that go along with its regional speech variations. If you can take those, ignore the actual geographic part of it, go to another country and be like, so you got those like weird ones who are really into like spinning their own pottery. They live by the coast and they're like, and then they'll be like, and then in that new country they'll be like, yeah, actually we do have those people, and they do sound a particular way, and we think they sound kind of haughty, and we don't particularly care for the way that they are. But I think these types of sentiments, they do carry over in some, like from country to country. But yes, some countries and some languages have an insane structure that allows for all sorts of like regional stereotypes and relationships to each other.
I think this reminds me of a joke. Oh, like when you're trying to compare these things. What was the name of the guy who did Transformers? He likes big explosions.
Michael Bay?
Yeah, Michael Bay. Someone said, they said, Christopher Nolan makes Michael Bay movies for people who read Malcolm Gladwell. And so, I like that kind of joke is kind of like, okay, so who are the Idahoans of Mongolia?
Yeah,
it's kind of exercise you're talking about, where like a lot of these times you can go to any kind of region-specific thing and ask, who are these people of that place, and what gets lost in that translation, or what the best fitting answer. It's like, I don't know, translating a novel from one language to another. Just interesting things will come up.
Yeah.
No, definitely, and I feel like we should cut this one, like post-production.
That will not happen.
What do you want to cut and why? That's good.
No.
Oh, the thing you're about to say.
Yeah.
So Israel. No.
No, actually, well, I'm not trying to. Well, I was just in my head. I was trying to count, like, how many terrorists come from this part of the country or this country.
That's one of the things. Like, you guys have a region that produces terrorists, right?
Yeah, and it's like no, because like Northern Ireland. Well, I was like, I don't think the IRA has been very active recently, but like, so one of the things like
where do your insurrectionists come from is actually maybe a less like charged and silly way to say this.
Yeah.
I have like a couple of Irish friends, and they were always complaining about like the Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, refused to acknowledge the
Good Friday Accords.
to give the Irish language like official status, because they said that like they will only give Irish language. The unionists said that like we'll recognize Irish if you recognize Scott Ulster, and like the Irish were like that is a pidgin that we will not like kind of like that is not a real language. They said that like and it's really funny because like tying back to your hillbilly elegy, they actually do sound like, they said that like supposedly the immigrants from there actually went to like Appalachia. So like if you actually listen to Scott Ulster, it sounds very similar to like people from like West Virginia.
Interesting.
I mean, geographically, those mountain ranges that are the northeastern part of Ireland and the northern part of Britain, those are the same mountain ranges as the Appalachians. They're literally like when the continents used to be together, that was all one mountain range. That was
Some people just yearn for the mountains.
they do, and they somehow gravitate there. They're just like
You just put them out. Yeah, there's like a marble rolling along a ridge or something. Like it's just kind of the marble rolling back to where it wants to go. So like they said, just to replay to understand it, they're like, oh, they will only allow the recognition of Irish language if they also recognize Scott.
Yeah, Scott Ulster.
Scott Ulster, and then Southern Ireland was like, no, that's. I love that example whenever people are always just kind of like, I don't know. There's a statue of a figure in Latin America called Fray Bartolomé, who was famous for indigenous
Las
rights.
Casas?
Yeah, Las Casas. He was famous, and there's statues all over where he would say to the Spanish conquistadores, we cannot and should not enslave and imprison these indigenous peoples. But they always leave out the second part of the quote, which is, that's what black people are for. God gave us black people to enslave. And so, like, he did fight for the rights of indigenous peoples, but he was like, but not for them. Like, these are not the subhumans you're looking for. And it just sounds like, I don't know, you will recognize our language. What about us? Not you. I never got that inclination, man.
But I think it's because the human rights is something that can be recognized universally. But I think
that's true. It's a lower stakes and blurrier line for like, do you get to be called a language?
Yeah, it's like the Burmese and Rohingya, right? It's like
okay, now we need to just cut the whole podcast. I'm not even sure where to start cutting that line. That's fine.
How long have we been going for?
I think we have, as far as my laptop battery is concerned, only about 10 minutes left anyway.
Oh, okay.
So we shouldn't hold ourselves back from ending if we want to.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to go.
Yeah, when you mentioned about Quebec being that region of the Quebecois accent to like the French language.
Oh, yeah.
I was trying to make the comparison between that and like Sri Lankan Tamil to like Indian Tamil.
Because Sri Lankan Tamils are the terrorists.
No! Wow!
Great.
Not all of them are Tamil tigers.
Now I gotta cut this part out.
Yeah, but like because like they are based like of this like I think like classical like more like ancient form of like Tamil and like French, and so like a lot of like they feel like when they listen they like they're just like listening to like classical Tamil or like classical French. So,
fascinating stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Before we close out, are there any other like anecdotes or things you want to drop in? I've got like a few that I wondered, but putting in.
Please.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. We don't have to talk at length about these. I'm just going to drop them. On the topic of dialects and languages, a really funny thing happens. So again, we went to Brown University, very fancy school, and to Charlie's point, a lot of fancy ways of speaking. There's a really funny thing that happens for a lot of people of ethnic minorities who go there and want to become actors, and a lot of other prestigious universities. It's when you cannot play the accent that you will be stereotyped into in Hollywood. Which is, if I went there and presented Latino, and I'm pretty white, so it doesn't have to happen, but they said, all right, now do a Latino accent. It is tragic when you cannot do your own stereotype, because I have a terrible Latino accent. And this is actually very pronounced with people who are black, and they said, like, all right, be more black, which is a thing people actually say on audition tables. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? But a lot of people struggle with that prompt if they were raised kind of in certain black families than other ones. I knew one half-Japanese actress who I remember watching her audition reel and thinking, man, your Japanese accent's terrible.
Let me show you how it's done.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to show you how it's done. But I just think this is, again, an interesting thing about languages and dialects that comes up sometimes, which is like sometimes you assimilate too well. The other thing I like is borrow words. I like how whenever I say, oh, I haven't been to other parts of Central America. I mean, I've been to Guatemala a lot, but I've never been to Costa Rica, El Salvador. And like, I say these with my Spanish accent sometimes, but I don't always. When I lived in Austin, Texas, I'd say like, oh, I live off Guadalupe Street. Because that's how I think you're supposed to say it. And in Japanese, there's a lot of borrow words too, where it's like, orenji jusu. Or if I want to say Spanish, I say Spango, which is not Spaingo. And I kind of like, part of my brain wants to go, oh, I speak Spango. No, I have to say, remember to say, I speak Supango, Vietnamugo, instead of Vietnam go. And I think borrow words like that are interesting, where to speak them authentically, you kind of have to accentify them a bit too. So this isn't so much dialects, but this is, again, on that like languages and where they have borders.
I think like there's this really annoying guy who wrote for the New York Times. I forget his name, and he was talking about how like he went into a fancy sandwich shop in New York.
Oh, this
with
was
his,
David Brooks.
David Brooks, yeah, with his like working class friend, saw all the names of the meat like mortadella and soppressata and whatever, and like freaked out and wanted to go somewhere more normal or something like that. And I don't know. I think like that article was very neurotic in like a kind of hilarious way, because I think that being made uncomfortable by like Italian sounding names after 9/11 is a little weird. Like, I don't know why I made that connection, but I feel like people will get what I mean, you know? Like, after 9/11, I think Italian culture became American culture. I don't think that's what this podcast is about, though. Sorry. My point is that, yes, sometimes people say words in a different accent to sound cool, and that's especially true when it comes to Italian stuff in American, like, food.
We can cut this out if it's too embarrassing. Can I call you out on a very funny story of yours that I like?
Yes.
I decorated my house with theater masks, and these are masks that come from the Italian format Commedia dell'arte. And so all the masks are for separate characters. And I had all the masks out on my table, and I had a sheet of paper with their labeling. So the first one says like Arlecchino, and the other says Dottore, and the other says, I don't know, Capitano. And I remember you picked up the sheet of paper with all the Italian words. You're like, what are these? Oh, they're pastas. Thinking it was something like fettuccine, rigatoni, or something like that.
I was doing a bit, but it was still a fun bit.
It was still a fun bit. And so anyway, I'm glad you weren't intimidated by the list of pastas I had.
Yeah. No, I it's really funny that like I think somewhat related to that. Well, two anecdotes. The first one is that like I think someone pointed out to me that like I think rather than like, you know how some people have like different accents in different languages, like I seem to have like merged like all of them
Into IDEs.
Yeah, like I feel like I don't know. It's someone pointed out to me that like, you know, kind of like I sound like a mix of all the different languages that combined into one, and it's but related to food. What's that place in Noe Valley? Like when I went on a date. It bothered me so much that this place was trying to be like so French that they added like random accents that are misplaced, and I was like, you know, and I was like, there is something legitimately wrong with this menu. I just have such visceral reaction.
Is it La Boulangerie?
No, not even that. That was it's
That's kind of mean, since you go on a date to La Boulangerie.
That's true. That the La Boulangerie is kind of just like a Starbucks at this point. Yeah.
But Digby, or Dixby, or I don't know.
That does sound like a place now.
Yeah. It's on.
But they've got an accent on the D.
No, they got an accent on the like bechamel. It's like written with an accent grave, and like I was like, yeah, there is definitely not an accent there.
I mean, could you order it authentically? I'd like the bechamel.
No, I mean I don't say that, but I was just like, you know, there's something. I was like, I want to take like a pen and just like, you know, kind of scratch off the accent.
Dude, is there a part of you that's like, when they ask like, is everything okay? You want to be like, no, everything is not okay. Do you guys realize you fucked up with the menu?
No, but like, no, when you said about the New York Times guy, I feel like I'm on my way there. Like, I was like,
but you're being made uncomfortable for a very different reason, which is that they fucked up. Right?
Yeah, and like, you know, kind of like there are certain things. Oh, like there is this cafe in like Vancouver. I think it's a Korean cafe, but like, you know, with a French name, and like the cafe is called Forêt Noire, which is like Black Forest, but with an extra e at the end. And I was like, forest is masculine, not feminine, and it's like, yeah,
they would know that if they were not foreigners. No.
Coréen.
If they were not Korean.
Okay, we are cutting this.
Adi has now volunteered to edit this podcast.
Yeah.
Holy shit, yeah.
There's only going to be like 5 minutes, and then like, yeah.
Hi, we're the three brown guys. End of podcast. All right, I think we're done.
Oh, I have one more game.
Yeah.
Go for it.
It is. Why don't we all say something in a different language than English into the microphone?
Okay.
So you could say something in Telugu, I could say something in Spanish, you could say something in one of your 45 languages, Adi. But like, we just get some non-English in here for fun.
Okay.
And what are you going to say?
What am I going to say? I like to point out, this is literally on my Hinge profile, that if you speak Spanish, the lyrics of Despacito are often like dirtier than most people expect. And at one point he says, Quiero firmar las paredes de tu laberinto, which means I'd like to sign the walls of your labyrinth, which I think is hot as hell. He said, hasta provocar tus gritos y que olvides tu apellido, which means I'm going to provoke a scream in you so good you forget your family name. Again, and like, it's not a dirty song, but if you are listening and you're used to American pop, it's raunchy as hell.
Do you know Yakult?
No. Is that a man or a person? No.
Do you know Yakult?
You mean the yogurt drink?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I didn't realize that's a Spanish slang.
I did not know that. I did not know that. I've heard Leche used, but not Yakult.
Yeah.
We're back to snowballing.
This podcast was actually about that. Okay.
Yeah, the whole time.
Adi.
Damn it, I can't think. Why don't you go first?
Okay. So whenever like Tenglish is very common, combining Telugu and English, and this happens in movies. And my dad gets very annoyed at it, but sometimes it's very funny. So because you can kind of tell like what they're saying if you just speak English. So one of the favorite lines that I repeat to my dad just to annoy him sometimes is "Nana, na confidence nuvu murder chestunavu," which just means, Dad, you're murdering my confidence. And it's just like the two of the words are English. The most important like information carrying words are English. Like it kind of started off as a bit, as like a thing I would say to my dad whenever I felt he was overbearing, to remind him of that one movie he got really mad at because they combined the languages that way. And then eventually my Telugu now it just sounds like that. Now there's just a lot of times where I like have forgotten the Telugu word and I'll just use the English word instead. And my dad will be very disappointed by it.
No, for some reason I just...
Okay, Adi, start a sentence in Indonesian, then do 2 words in German, then 2 words in French, then 2 words in Spanish, then 2 words in...
Polish.
No, like in the same sentence?
Yeah, the same sentence. Try to, like, we can decide, like, I went to the store to buy some flowers, but they were too expensive. And just try and incorporate a little of each of these languages as much as you can.
Saya pergi ke toko, j'achète du farine, es war ziemlich teuer, Fische 很好吃.
Sick. All right. That is a wrap.
That's a wrap. Thank you.